Hello dear viewer, the other day I listened to track 6 off of You Will Never Know Why by Sweet Trip and a light bulb physically manifested above my head, and now I'm here. I asked my dearest viewers to send me the darkest songs they've ever heard, and today I'm going to rank them on this tier list here, based on how dark I think they are myself. Without further ado, let's hop into the first one. Penis84 says The Manifold Curiosity by K.O. Dot. Track's kinda Godspeed You Black Emperor coded, I must say. Very ambitious track, and had some absolutely incredible moments here. Some sections of this, though, I did find myself a little bored, to be honest. Certainly felt like 14 minutes, I'll say that much. But again, when this song was good, it was pretty damn incredible. The closing segment reminds me a lot of A Heavier Sleep by Godspeed You Black Emperor, I guess. Not really sure how dark it is, to be honest. Very few lyrics here. But it had some darkness in it. I'll go into early Jiminy Cricket. Striker Fried 515 says I threw a rock over an overpass and killed a guy by Sign Crushed Motorist. Kind of an ominous sound to it, I guess. Some weird screaming in the background that I honestly find a little corny myself, but I don't know the full context. That's actually all the song is, I'm afraid. Some interesting instrumentation that does paint a fairly dark picture, funeral-esque, I suppose, but the screaming kind of takes me out of this one pretty hard. I'll go back to Jiminy Cricket. Aquafontaine says The Mine Electric by Miracle Musical. Intro to this song kind of blew chunks, to be honest, and by intro, I mean the entire first half. It's trying to be dark and not really sticking the landing, I don't think. Very distorted and kind of an annoying listen, honestly. As the song progresses, it gains a little luster in the second half, I suppose. Some cool instrumental work, but I'm just not a fan here. Reminds me of the FNAF people, on a less intense scale, but vocally this is pretty uninteresting to me. Kind of a little dark, I'm afraid. Matthew R203S says Daddy by Korn. Probably been said 5 billion times, but the story is so emotionally brutal that every time I hear it, I just stare at the wall for a while thinking about what Jonathan Davis went through. Not to mention the last few minutes of actual instrumentation is just Jonathan breaking into tears. It sure has been said 5 billion times, but it's still a pretty great answer. It tells the true story of Jonathan Davis's childhood trauma in one of the most personal and authentic ways I've heard in music. But absolutely the final segment of the song is something that's just genuinely haunting. Very emotional listen, and sonically etches that darkness into it with some very eerie guitar work and bass, not to mention Jonathan Davis's genuinely unreal performance. Poured absolutely everything he had into this track. The Jeepers from me. Untold13 says The Hermit by Spiral Staircase. Some pretty dark stuff right here. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the lyricism here, but it sounds very personal and passionate, haunting at points, I suppose, especially in the final verse. Instrumental work is very barren at points, but it builds to this climax, this kind of eruption of noise and screaming. It's a very profound song, I think. Very personal, not something I can really connect to myself, but something I can certainly empathize with. Dark stuff. I'll say whoa Nelly. Ben Drowned C3PO says Frogs by Alice in Chains. Has always felt the darkest out of their already very dark discography for me, so I'd have to go with that. I say dark, someone feels legally obligated to mention Frogs by Alice in Chains. Does it confuse me? Certainly not. It's a very dark and personal track from Lane Staley, especially at that point in his life, a moment of reflection, almost from the other side of the fence. As though he's looking back on his life before he's even died, kind of accepting his death and questioning how it got this bad. Instrumentally also very eerie and dark, very sparse guitar work, really just that one riff repeating throughout. It kind of echoes the cycle Lane found himself in at the time. It's haunting stuff, going back to Jeepers. Henry Lowenthal 1497 says Age Ain't Nothing But a Number by Aaliyah. R. Kelly wrote it while they were married. She was 27 and she was 15. On the album cover, R. Kelly blurred and is lurking in the background like a predator stalking its prey. This is pretty poor stuff for sure. Incredibly dark in the context of both their lives, certainly, but sonically this has no darkness to it, I don't think. Which puts me in quite a predicament, to be honest. Many strange lyrical moments on this track feel like weird foreshadowing. Genuinely astonishing this was allowed to occur, to be honest. But I'm confused. Isaac Danube 2434 says, I Don't Love by Have a Nice Life. Everybody knows this album is some real haunting shit, but this song in particular is harrowing. Certainly an album I anticipated receiving on this video at least 14 times. One of the 2 songs I decided to include here. It's pretty dark stuff lyrically for sure. The entire album is incredibly dark sonically. Very loud instrumentation, shoegaze-esque, and that contrasts really well with the vocal delivery, I think. Very soft. Lyrically devastating stuff as well, describing a numbness to almost emotion itself. Almost a little hair flip emo coded, but it's pretty dark stuff. Top of Whoa Nelly. State of grace. Words I shouldn't have said are all forgiven. Bobby TJ1HQ says Hangman by Young Fathers. Really disturbing all around. I don't care for this, to be frank. Sounds really, 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 really corny to me. Both lyrically and the vocal delivery itself come across that way. The chorus is solid, but the verses here are pretty agonizing, I would say. Dark, but not even in a particularly engaging way. Go on top of kinda a little dark. Wingcream6566 says Dead Goon by Mr. Bungle. The vibe of the song is just chilling, not to mention the lyrics. Pretty freaky song for sure, but that's kind of the Bungle's bread and butter. Not sure it's the darkest shit I've heard from the guys, but it's certainly got a dark nature to it. Some of the production etches that creepiness as well. Some of the more whimsical sounds do come off pretty creepy. But I think creepy is the word I'm using here before dark. Lyrically, it's not all that dark, I don't think. Kind of just bungle-coded. It's very inexplicable shenanigans delivered by a goat vocalist. It works, but I don't think it's that dark. Go back a Jiminy Cricket. Fluid Tomato says Carrie by Isis. It's about an emotionally broken man who ends himself by drowning in the ocean. Detailed lyric imagery and instrumentation perfectly replicate despair and drowning into the form of a song. Detailed lyrical imagery, brother, I can't tell what the fuck he's saying. I did read some of the lyrics though, they do seem fairly dark. Instrumentally, some pretty heavy stuff, but I thoroughly enjoyed the build-up of this song. I can't say I cared for the vocals once again, but I don't think they particularly detracted from the quality of the track here. It's fairly dark stuff. I'll go top of Jiminy Cricket. Serial Designation says Ripe with Decay by 9 Inch Nails. A very original piece, and soul-crushing every time I listen to it. Sounds like a camera slowly panning out of a corpse in a meadow. If I had a nickel for every time 9 Inch Nails concluded a concept album on an absolutely harrowing track, I'd most certainly have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's something to consider. Very eerie track across the board for sure, the piano work especially, very anxiety-inducing and kind of tension-building. Production as well paints that picture pretty clearly. Very haunting way to end an album as dark as The Fragile is, on an instrumental conclusion that just kind of exudes darkness, to be honest. Going back a Jeepers. Cyborg4234 says Nervous, Sad, and Poor by Godspeed You Black Emperor. Just about as dark and haunting as every other song Godspeed You Black Emperor has ever made. Absolutely incredible sound throughout though. Unreal build-up with unreal sorrow kind of baked into every moment. And unlike a lot of their other music, it never really builds to anything. Not in a bad way by any means. A lot of their music kind of heads towards this almost serenely beautiful conclusion. This one ends with a more droning piece. One of the darker songs I've heard from these fellas, and that's saying quite a lot. Go on top of Jeepers. His shadow is cast wherever he stands. Silly Billy Q2 says Red Right Hand by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. This is some pretty sinister shit, I think. That's the word I'm going for today. Feels less depressing and more like a kind of evil in a way. Nick Cave's storytelling here is kind of just unsettling. The atmosphere honestly does a lot of the heavy lifting here, just creates this very freaky picture. Makes you feel like you're being followed through an empty town at night. I'm gonna go Jiminy Cricket behind ISIS, not the terrorist group. Your eyes fix on a shotgun that you're holding in your hand. Shuttle to Theta says Ballad of Hollis Brown by Bob Dylan. Follows the father and his family living in extreme poverty. Cannot afford feed his family and ends up killing his family and himself to save them from the life they were living. Well, yeah, that's pretty fucking dark. One of Bob Dylan's bleaker songs, I'd say, by a good amount. Tells the story in such a matter-of-fact way as well. It almost makes it worse. There's no subtlety here. Just watching this family kind of fall apart. And then the ending is just fucking Jesus Christ. Doesn't really offer any hope whatsoever. It's dark stuff. Going back a Whoa Nelly. Ace Lion LM says Eraser by 9 Inch Nails. It's probably not the darkest I've heard in general, but it's in fact one of the darkest songs in 9 Inch Nails' whole discography. I guess. I don't know, I think there's darker songs off this record, but it is definitely Trent Reznor at some of his absolute darkest lyrically, even though there's very few words here. More self-hatred than outright sadness. It's very dark, I guess. Sounds like someone's mind completely unraveling in a way. The instrumental is so kind of abrasive, it almost becomes uncomfortable. Definitely one of the nastier songs in their catalog, but I wouldn't say the darkest from them. I'm gonna go behind Frogs and Jeepers. Skin is crawling off. Jeeftropolis 2 says Electric Shock Blues by the Eels. Song about the frontman's sister receiving shock therapy at an institution. A real pick-me-up. Thank you for sharing. Knowing the context makes this hit a lot harder for sure. This entire song feels emotionally kind of exhausted, very defeated. Doesn't really scream or cry. It's not all that aggressive. Just again sounds defeated. Makes this song even a little darker, to be honest. It's a very heavy listen. I didn't have any fun. I'm gonna go back a Whoa Nelly. Achintia says Day of the Lords by Joy Division. The song has this constant backdrop of hopelessness and dread, a certain intimacy with said dread, comfort with the hopelessness, as if it's been there since birth. It's dark, alright. Ian Curtis and Joy Division just kind of understood darkness and hopelessness better than most bands, I would say. Feels very cold and detached, very numb, once again. Ian Curtis sounds weirdly comfortable inside all the despair, like you kind of mentioned. Very defeated. Doesn't build toward any optimism at any point, just kind of sits in that darkness the whole way through in acceptance. It's very, very dark stuff. Going behind I Don't Love in Whoa Nelly. Northwest Rain 2399 says I'm Going to Do It by Giles Corey. Probably one of the most devastating songs I've ever heard, to be honest. The title alone tells you exactly where this is fucking going. Feels very intimate though, very human once again. Just reading somebody's kind of final journal entry, because I can't say the other word. Incredibly difficult listen, behind Godspeed You Black Emperor in the Jeepers tier. Future Tense D9R says 18 in Life by Skid Row. Kind of more relevant now than ever before. This one's a weird one, I think. It kind of sounds like a fairly standard rock song sonically. The story itself, though, is certainly tragic. Kind of story of a mistake destroying somebody's life. Feels even more relevant nowadays, I guess. Way darker than its sound initially lets on, for sure. But the instrumental work here isn't really all that dark. Kind of the words. Going back at Jiminy Cricket. The Quark 414 says I See a Darkness by Bonnie Prince Billy. Very stripped down track, I think. Almost sounds like somebody quietly confessing their depression. Kind of just, I don't know, a therapy session even. No dramatic climax or anything, just incredibly vulnerable lyricism and songwriting. That's fairly haunting stuff. Go Jiminy Cricket, above KO Dot. Holster the Wise says King Park by La Dispute. 7-minute retelling of a real-life gang shooting that resulted in an innocent kid's death, detailing the fallout and the shooter taking his life to escape the guilt. Depressing song that leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination. It's not a song to listen to in the car with your friend, which is how I first heard it. That sounds like a terrible car ride, but this is one of the most emotionally brutal songs I think I've ever heard, especially in how straightforward it is, like you mentioned. The storytelling is just unbelievably vivid and detailed. It doesn't spare you any of the details, and the ending of this just kind of is a haunting piece of this. It's very heartbreaking stuff. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Top of Whoa Nelly. Tommy Giordano 5654 says Hunter by Have a Nice Life. Here's their second entry. It feels impossibly empty. Have a Nice Life are so good at making music that just feels terribly dark. Huge walls of sound sonically, but somehow incredibly lonely with the vocal performances. More existential than outright depressing, I think. But just very unsettling atmospherically. Is that a word? Jeepers, Between the 9 Inch Nails. The Scapegoat 1344 says Strip the Soul by Porcupine Tree. A very oppressive feeling throughout this song. Steven Wilson, a fairly talented motherfucker at making shit feel very uncomfortable, to be honest. Slow burning dread more than outright horror here. But it doesn't let up very much either. It's very intense, while still kind of feeling slow. Strange. Leaves you feeling very uneasy, I would say. I'm gonna go Jiminy Cricket behind ISIS, not the terrorist group. Marinos 1409 says Prison Sex by Tool. I figured this one will be here too. One of Tool's more disturbing songs for sure. Tackles abuse and cycles of trauma in a very uncomfortable and straightforward way. Definitely not an easy listen. Definitely not for the faint of heart. It's dark because of what it's actually trying to say. It makes you kind of sit with incredibly ugly subject matter that really I can't imagine many other bands would want to tackle. I'm gonna go Jeepers behind Frogs. I read the news today, oh boy. Speedrunner Mind says A Day in the Life by the Beatles. Always felt that the contrast of the upbeat and happy parts mixed with the huge orchestral climax was made to reflect how dark society can be. An interesting idea, I think. I don't know if it's necessarily dark on the surface, but with that deeper layer, perhaps it's a little dark. There's something deeply unsettling about it, just kind of underneath all the layers. The orchestral swell feels almost apocalyptic, I think is a good word to describe it. Very dystopian in a way. Like the world slowly descending into chaos. One of the eeriest Beatles songs for sure. I'm gonna go Whoa Nelly behind Bob Dylan. Don't you worry, impossible for anything to I'm in nowhere, my Poppy Crisp says On GP by Death Grips. The real instruments and the themes being talked about make it a pretty raw listen for anyone going through a dark time. Shockingly vulnerable track by Death Grip standards. Usually they're just kind of screaming about shit that I can't really wrap my head around. Sounds like someone desperately trying to find a reason to keep going, almost. The live instrumentation adds so much emotion here than a lot of their other stuff. One of their most human songs, like I mentioned. It's a very powerful listen from these guys. Not something you really expect from them, but it's super cool to hear. We'll go Whoa Nelly above Bob Dylan. Lemonade Banana says Purity by Slipknot. Not only are the lyrics dark and sinister, but the instrumentation gives you almost a feeling of dread, especially the drum roll breaks. This is pretty dreadful from beginning to end. The drumming and the atmosphere are unbelievably tense. Lyrics are super disturbing, even for Corey Taylor's standards. It feels very claustrophobic, I think, especially kind of with the pacing of this song. One of their creepier tracks for sure. Go back a Whoa Nelly. RJ Scooper says, Never See Me Again by Kanye West. Such an intense song when you know that his life was basically falling apart from his perspective. He was planning on ending his life to releasing this song. That context completely changes this for sure. I never knew that, I'm afraid. Sounds exhausted more than anything, I would say. It's very haunting to think about, especially in that context of his life. One of Kanye's saddest unreleased tracks for sure. It's very human from a man that kind of felt on top of the world at some point. We'll go Whoa Nelly above Death Grips.
Partially, I feel it's my fault. That right there is my...
Joaquin Morberg says Survivor's Guilt by Joey Badass. I think this is a heavy topic handled very well. It carries this constant weight throughout it, and it's Joey Badass telling a very important story to him, which I think is kind of when he thrives the best. It feels like Joey's trying to process things that never really kind of left him, just things he struggled with for a long time. More reflective than dramatic, but it's very emotional. But it's also very emotional. I'll go behind Bob Dylan in the Whoa Nelly tier.
You have many contacts among the lumberjacks.
The Upacare says Ballad of a Thin Man by Bob Dylan. It's especially darker within the context of the doc, but basically it's Dylan in the most controversial point of his career, being constantly booed and told to go home for 2 hours every night, and with terrible sleep deprivation and insomnia. You can hear people shouting at Bob throughout the entire song, and somehow he seems numb to it. The context makes this a lot darker for sure. Dylan was kind of just burnt out at this point, I guess. Constantly getting booed every night while barely sleeping, that's no fun. But somehow he sounds very detached from it. I think that's the darkest part of this song. Very eerie performance knowing everything going on behind the scenes. But the song itself, not the darkest stuff I've ever heard, I don't think. I'll go back to Jiminy Cricket. Cyber Sam says Mascara by Deftones. This is more toxic than outright dark, I guess. Chino's vocals make everything feel strangely threatening, I guess. Has this very suffocating atmosphere, though. It's a quieter track from Deftones standards, but it's also incredibly intense at points. One of their darker songs earlier in their career, I'd say. But I think they get a little darker as they go on. I'll go Jiminy Cricket behind Porcupine Tree.
In a normal house, a normal family.
Greater Seraph says Where the River Ends by OTEP. I tried listening to that song in a dark room with nothing but a video game for company, and it triggered my fight or flight. This one's pretty terrifying, to be honest. It doesn't make you sad. It kind of puts you on edge. The atmosphere is incredibly oppressive, for sure. I can absolutely understand the fight or flight comparison, I think, to be honest. It's very anxiety-inducing track. Very relentless. I'll go Whoa Nelly behind Death Grips.
Look across the table, I see a lot more than what appears to be a shadow. He walks across the room.
Jesse5871 says Top Picks for You by Injury Reserve. Haunting instrumental and lyrics that address death in a post-digital age. Such a uniquely modern kind of darkness explored on this track. Something you couldn't have wrote 30 years ago. It wouldn't have fit. But one of the most unsettling songs off this album for sure. Gives you feeling very empty. Very hollow, I think. It's dark stuff. I'm going to go back a Whoa Nelly. Joe10R6 says Helpless Child by Swans. By far my favorite song of all time, while being super dark and painting a really bleak and disturbing picture. It's super hard to describe. I have no other words for it other than it's a song that sounds like the universe is opening up to you and you're seeing something you shouldn't see. Listened to it for the first time when I was very high. 10 out of 10 would recommend. That makes a lot of sense. It feels genuinely larger than life, this entire track, like a lot of Swans music does. But it does sound like you're seeing something you aren't really supposed to see. A very disturbing view of the world. It slowly builds into this overwhelming wall of despair in the second half of this track. One of the most emotionally crushing songs I've ever heard, to be honest, and an unforgettable experience. I'll never forget hearing this for the first time. Going Jeepers, behind Undertow. Browmeister H7C says Died by Alice in Chains. One of the last songs the band recorded before Lane Staley's death. You can tell Lane was too far gone by this point. A lot of Alice in Chains' later work with Lane is very haunting for that reason, I guess. You can hear how worn down he kind of sounds in this song especially. Feels like less of a performance and more like a goodbye, to be honest. A lot like the Unplugged session does to me. One of the sadder songs in their catalog just based on his condition, I think. Really difficult to separate the music from the tragedies surrounding it, though. I'm not sure how sad it would be out of that context, but I don't know. I'm gonna go Whoa Nelly, Above Death Consciousness for my goat. That's all I have written here. Thank you very much for watching, dear viewer. Subscribe if you enjoyed, maybe. Follow my Twitch, maybe. And I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.